My name is Commander Vex Cole of the Zephyrian High Command, and I have witnessed many things that defy logic. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that day at Apex Academy. Nexus 7 station houses the most prestigious combat training facility in the galaxy. We send our deadliest young here, the cream of the crop, the future apex predators of their respective species. The entrance requirements alone could kill most sentient beings. So naturally, when the Human Exchange Program announced they were sending a candidate, we expected, well, something impressive. What walked through our doors was Maya Sterling. She stood barely 5.5 feet tall, weighed maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, and had the audacity to smile at everything. No visible weapons, no natural armor plating, no acid glands, no psychic emanations. Nothing. She looked like she should be serving refreshments at a diplomatic reception, not training alongside galactic killing machines. The other students were, shall we say, more traditionally intimidating. Kraxon, a Gorlaxian behemoth whose species literally devours asteroids for breakfast, stood 8 feet tall and had rock-hard carapace that could deflect plasma bolts. Silthan, representing the Viperoid Collective, possessed acid sacs that could dissolve titanium in seconds, plus reflexes that made lightning look sluggish. Then there was Nyx Era, a cerebral huntress whose psychic abilities could paralyze prey from 50 meters away. And Maya Sterling, who looked like a stiff breeze might knock her over. The day's challenge was announced, the Predator Maze Endurance Test. 20 minutes. Starting position only. No movement of feet allowed. Survive waves of holographic apex predators programmed with real hunting behaviors from across the galaxy. Impossible, rumbled Kraxon, flexing claws that could tear through starship hulls. Without our natural advantages? Hissed Silthan, acid literally dripping from anticipation. But the test is flawed, declared Nyx Era, her mental voice sharp with dismissal. Maya Sterling just stood there and smiled. That little human smile should have been our first warning. But we were too busy being impressed with ourselves to notice that Maya was already calculating something we couldn't even comprehend yet. The holographic chamber activated with a sound like reality tearing apart. Instantly, the sterile training room transformed into a nightmarish landscape of swirling mists, jagged terrain, and shadows that moved with predatory intent. The air itself seemed to thicken with the scent of ozone and something that made every survival instinct scream. Then came the predators. Shadow stalkers from the void rim materialized first, their forms shifting between solid matter and pure darkness. Next, the infamous razor wings of Kepler-7, holographic recreations so accurate you could practically feel their bioelectric fields crackling. Finally, the crowd favorite, siege crushers from the heavy worlds, massive digitized beasts whose footsteps alone could simulate seismic activity. Kraxon lasted exactly 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The mighty Gorlaxian, for all his natural armor and asteroid-crushing strength, panicked the moment a shadow stalker phased through his defenses. He started swinging wildly, breaking the no-movement rule, and was immediately disqualified as simulated claws raked across his carapace. Silthan managed 3 minutes and 47 seconds before his acid-spitting reflexes kicked in. A Razorwing's dive bomb attack triggered his defensive response, and he found himself violating the stationary requirement as he twisted to spray acid at his attackers. Nyx Era, our supposed psychic prodigy, cracked at the 4-minute mark. Her mental shields couldn't block the realistic fear responses the holograms were designed to trigger, and she stumbled backward in terror, automatically disqualifying herself. And Maya Sterling? She closed her eyes. What is this Deathworlder doing? Meditating? I watched through the observation window as the first wave of digital predators approached her position. Shadow stalkers circled her like smoke given malevolent form. A Razorwing descended in a perfect attack pattern, talons extended, bioelectric field charging for a killing strike. The Siege Crusher's massive form cast her in shadow as it approached from behind. Maya didn't even flinch. Is she frozen in terror? That was my first thought. Humans, despite their reputation as Deathworlders, are still soft-bodied creatures. Perhaps the realistic nature of our holographic systems had overwhelmed her primitive nervous system. Perhaps she was experiencing some kind of shock response that prevented movement. But then I noticed something peculiar. Her breathing. It wasn't the rapid, panicked gasping of a terrified creature. It was slow, controlled, rhythmic, almost purposeful. And there was something else. Subtle movements that barely registered on our sensors. Slight tilt of her head, maybe 2 degrees to the left. A barely perceptible shift in her shoulder position. The slightest adjustment of her weight distribution. The timer read 5 minutes elapsed, 15 to go. The predators continued their attack patterns, but something was off. Their strikes were coming just slightly wide of their marks. Not by much, mere centimeters in some cases, but in combat, centimeters might as well be kilometers. What was this human doing that we weren't seeing? At the 7-minute mark, Maya Sterling opened her eyes. Still, she didn't move her feet. Not even a shuffle. But those dark human eyes began tracking the predators with an intensity that made my scales prickle. The second wave had activated, massive digital void stalkers, creatures so terrifying that even their holographic representations required special psychological clearance to observe. These hunters materialized next, interdimensional nightmares that could attack from multiple reality layers simultaneously. She's about to be torn apart. Gasped Professor Thrix, Al, from the observation deck. Finally, muttered Assistant Director Colvin. I was wondering when the human would break. But Maya Sterling didn't break. Instead, she started humming. A soft, melodic sound that seemed completely inappropriate for someone surrounded by the galaxy's most efficient killing machines. Then, barely audible through our audio pickups, I heard her counting under her breath. The numbers, but not in any pattern that made immediate sense. 3.7, 2.15, 1.3. What in the 7 void cursed dimensions was she calculating? That's when it hit me like a plasma bolt to the cognitive centers. The maze wasn't random. Nothing at Apex Academy ever was. Every holographic predator followed specific behavioral algorithms, attack patterns based on real biological data from their species. The timing sequences, the approach vectors, the strike intervals, they were all programmed, and Maya Sterling had been mapping them. For 7 minutes, while we thought she was frozen in terror, this human had been analyzing every single predator's movement patterns, calculating their algorithmic behaviors, and memorizing their timing sequences. Her brain, that supposedly inferior human organ, had been processing data at a rate that would make our combat computers envious. She began making tiny gestures with just her fingers and head. A slight nod here, a minimal finger twitch there. Movements so small they barely registered on our motion sensors, but precisely calculated to exploit something we hadn't even considered. The predators started missing her. Not by accident, not by luck, by mathematics. A void stalker's claws swept through the space where Maya's head had been a microsecond earlier, but she had tilted it exactly 2.3 degrees to the left at precisely the right moment. A phase hunter's interdimensional strike phased through empty air because Maya had shifted her shoulder position by exactly 1.7 centimeters. She was exploiting micro-delays in the holographic system. Every hologram, no matter how sophisticated, requires processing time. Nanoseconds between command and manifestation. Tiny gaps between sensory input and behavioral response. Delays so minuscule that no sane creature would ever think to account for them. But Maya Sterling wasn't accounting for them. She was using them. Each micro-movement was timed to coincide with those processing delays, placing her infinitesimally out of sync with the predator's targeting systems. She wasn't dodging attacks, she was making the attacks dodge her. Impossible, breathed Nyx Era, her psychic senses probably detecting the mathematical precision of Maya's actions. She's hacking the maze, I whispered, barely believing my own words, with her body. The timer read 10 minutes elapsed, halfway through the test. Maya continued her soft counting, her tiny movements, her infuriating humming. The predators circled her like frustrated hunters around prey that existed in a slightly different dimension. They could see her, could target her, but somehow, impossibly, could never quite touch her. And Maya Sterling just stood there, feet planted in exactly the same position where she'd started, looking for all the galaxy like she was enjoying a pleasant afternoon stroll instead of defying the fundamental laws of predator-prey dynamics. At the 12-minute mark, the maze's difficulty algorithm kicked into overdrive. The predators became faster, their movements more erratic and aggressive. New species materialized, quantum rippers that could exist in multiple positions simultaneously, hive swarmers that attacked in coordinated patterns, and the dreaded echo hunters whose strikes could bend space-time around their targets. The air crackled with holographic energy signatures so intense that our observation shields automatically activated. Any rational being would have panicked. Maya Sterling adjusted her breathing pattern by 0.03 seconds. That's when I finally understood the true scope of what this human had accomplished. She hadn't just been standing there for 12 minutes. She had been preparing for this moment since the day she arrived at Apex Academy. While our students were busy flexing their natural advantages, Maya Sterling had been doing something far more dangerous. She had been studying. The Academy's databases, containing detailed behavioral analyses of every apex predator species in the galaxy, had been accessed repeatedly from her dormitory terminal. Not for research papers or academic curiosity, for memorization. She had studied each species' hunting patterns, attack sequences, territorial behaviors, and biological blind spots with the methodical precision of a military strategist. And then she had calculated the optimal micro-positioning to exploit every single weakness. The Stillness wasn't passive endurance. It was strategic positioning mastery at a level that made our most advanced combat algorithms look primitive by comparison. Every tiny shift, every microscopic adjustment of her stance had been calculated to place her at the mathematical center of maximum predator confusion. But Maya Sterling wasn't finished showing off. A quantum ripper phased into attack position, its probability matrix locked onto her position. Maya tilted her head exactly 4 degrees to the right. The ripper's strike passed through empty space, but the energy discharge struck a hive swarmer that had been approaching from Maya's left flank. The swarmer's defensive protocols activated, and it lashed out at the nearest threat, the quantum ripper. What just happened? Gasped Professor Thrixal. She redirected the attack, I whispered, my voice barely functional. She used the ripper's own strike against the swarmer. But Maya was just getting started. An echo hunter materialized behind her, its space-time distortion field charging for a reality-bending assault. Maya's response was to shift her weight distribution by exactly 2.7% forward. The hunter's distortion field interacted with the probability matrix of a nearby quantum ripper, causing both predators to phase into the same dimensional space simultaneously. The result was spectacular. Both holograms began attacking each other with the single-minded fury of territorial apex predators suddenly finding themselves occupying the same hunting ground. She's turning them against each other, shouted Assistant Director Colven, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. This is impossible, muttered Nixara. Predators don't behave this way. They're programmed to focus on the target, not fight among themselves. But Maya Sterling had found something in the programming that our own designers had missed. Every apex predator, no matter how artificial, retained the core behavioral triggers of their species: territorial instincts, dominance hierarchies, competitive aggression. She was exploiting not just the technical limitations of the holographic systems, but the fundamental psychology of predator behavior itself. A void stalker swept toward her position, shadow form rippling with lethal intent. Maya's response was almost too subtle to detect. She changed her breathing rhythm. The slight alteration in air displacement affected the hologram's sensory algorithms, causing it to register a false proximity reading. The stalker struck at where Maya should have been based on its readings, but intersected instead with a hive swarmer's attack pattern. The two predators immediately began engaging each other with the savage efficiency that had made their species legendary across the galaxy. Within minutes, Maya had turned the predator maze into a self-defeating system. Holograms fought holograms while she stood serenely in the center, making microscopic adjustments that kept the chaos flowing around her like water around a stone. She had transformed her supposed weakness, her inability to fight, into the ultimate strength, the ability to make everything else fight for her. The timer read 15 minutes elapsed, 5 minutes remaining. Final phase protocol activating, announced the Maze's AI system, its synthetic voice carrying an almost ominous tone. Every holographic predator suddenly froze, their forms shimmering as new programming took effect. Whatever was coming next, it was designed to be the ultimate test. The kind of challenge that even the galaxy's most dangerous apex predators would struggle to survive. Maya Sterling smiled wider and made a tiny adjustment to her stance, positioning herself with mathematical precision for whatever impossible thing she was about to do next. Apex Protocol activated, the Maze's AI announced with digital satisfaction. All predator types. Maximum aggression parameters. Simultaneous manifestation. The holographic chamber exploded into chaos. Every apex predator species in the Galactic database materialized at once. Shadowstalkers, Void Rippers, Quantum Hunters, Phase Stalkers, Echo Beasts, Hive Swarmers, Siege Crushers, and dozens of others I couldn't even identify. The air itself became a writhing mass of claws, fangs, energy discharges, and reality distortions. It was a predator density that should have been mathematically impossible, a convergence of killing machines that violated every natural law of territorial behavior. It should have been instant death for any single organism. Maya Sterling closed her eyes again and laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a hysteria-induced cackle. A genuine, delighted laugh, like someone had just told her the universe's best joke. "She's lost her mind," whispered Professor Thrixow. "The human brain has finally cracked under the pressure." But I was beginning to suspect that Maya Sterling's mind was the only thing in this room that hadn't cracked. The predators converged on her position with lethal synchronization, a tsunami of holographic death that should have overwhelmed any conceivable defense. And then they stopped. Not all at once, but in a pattern so subtle it took my enhanced Zephyrian cognitive processors several seconds to recognize it. They were creating a buffer zone around Maya's exact position, a tiny circle of space maybe 2 meters in diameter where none of them could seem to establish dominance. That's when I understood her masterstroke. Maya hadn't just been calculating holographic timing delays and algorithmic patterns. She had been studying evolutionary biology. Every predator species in the galaxy had evolved specific territorial behaviors, hunting ranges, and dominance protocols. And she had found the one mathematical point where all of those instincts canceled each other out. The maze's center point. In nature, when multiple apex predators converge on the same territory, they instinctively avoid direct center zone conflicts. It's too dangerous, too costly, too likely to result in mutual destruction. Instead, they establish perimeter territories and compete for dominance through displays and indirect challenges. Maya had positioned herself at the exact mathematical center of their collective territorial instincts. The one spot where millions of years of evolutionary programming told every predator to avoid direct confrontation. But she wasn't finished. As the predators circled her position in frustrated confusion, Maya Sterling began to move. Not her feet, which remained planted in the exact same spot where she'd started 20 minutes ago, but everything else. Her hands started making complex gestures, fingers dancing through patterns that seemed random but were clearly anything but. The maze's motion sensors, designed to track movement for targeting purposes, began receiving conflicting data streams. The gestures were too complex, too rapid, too multifaceted for the algorithms to process coherently. Then she started making vocal sounds. Not words, not even recognizable language, but a series of tones and frequencies that interfered with the audio tracking systems. Each sound was precisely calibrated to create acoustic interference patterns that confused the predator's sensory arrays. Her eyes began moving in rapid, seemingly chaotic patterns, tracking multiple targets simultaneously while avoiding direct eye contact with any single predator. The targeting algorithms designed to lock onto prey through visual recognition couldn't establish stable locks on something that was looking everywhere and nowhere at the same time. She's hacking the maze, I breathed, using human behavioral complexity. It was brilliant, terrifying, absolutely impossible. And it was working. The predators couldn't lock onto her because she had become too unpredictable. Every targeting system in the maze was designed to track and predict the behavior of apex predators, creatures that followed logical, evolutionarily tested patterns. But Maya Sterling was doing something that no apex predator had ever evolved to do. She was being completely, utterly, magnificently random. Random hand movements that created false motion signatures. Random vocal patterns that generated acoustic white noise. Random eye movements that broke every targeting algorithm simultaneously. She had turned human behavioral complexity into a weapon against artificial intelligence. The predators began attacking each other in frustration, their inability to target Maya forcing them to redirect their aggression toward available alternatives. The holographic chamber became a swirling vortex of digital violence, with Maya Sterling standing perfectly still at its calm center, orchestrating chaos through sheer unpredictability. 30 seconds remaining on the timer. Maya Sterling threw back her head and laughed with pure joy, the sound somehow cutting through the digital roar of combat around her. It was the laugh of someone who had just solved an impossible puzzle, who had found a solution so elegant and unexpected that even she was delighted by its audacity. 20 seconds. The predators were destroying each other now, their programming unable to cope with the paradox Maya had created. She was simultaneously the most obvious target in the maze and completely untargetable, present and absent, still and chaotic, predictable and impossible. 10 seconds. How? Whispered Nixara, her psychic senses probably reeling from the contradiction of Maya's existence. 5 seconds. Maya Sterling winked at the observation window, somehow knowing exactly where we were watching from, and made one final gesture, a simple human thumbs up. The timer hit 0. Maya Sterling had won without taking a single step. Silence. Complete, absolute, universe-crushing silence filled the observation deck. Even the maze's AI seemed stunned, its usual post-test analysis delayed as if its processors couldn't quite compute what had just occurred. The holographic predators faded away, leaving Maya Sterling standing alone in the center of the chamber, hands on her hips, looking around with the casual interest of someone admiring a particularly nice garden. No sweat, no heavy breathing, no signs of stress whatsoever. She looked up at the observation window and called out cheerfully, "So did I pass?" Did she pass? She had just redefined the fundamental nature of survival itself, and she was asking if she passed? Professor Thrixow's jaw had unhinged completely, a biological response his species reserved for encountering the truly incomprehensible. Assistant Director Cole Venn was making rapid notes on his datapad, probably trying to figure out how to rewrite the Academy's entire curriculum. Nixara sat in stunned psychic silence, her mental barriers still reeling from witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible. And I finally understood what we had been missing about humans. We had always assumed that Deathworlder meant physically superior, stronger, faster, more resilient than species from gentler planets. But Maya Sterling had just demonstrated something far more terrifying than physical prowess. Humans aren't physically superior to other species. They're strategically superior. Every other species in the galaxy relies on their natural advantages. We Zephyrians have our enhanced cognitive processing. The Gorlaxians have their armor and strength. The Viperoids have their acid and speed. We are what evolution made us, and we fight the way our biology dictates. But humans? Humans adapt, they think. They find solutions that don't exist until they create them. Maya walked to the chamber exit, pausing only when Kraxon, still nursing his wounded pride, rumbled, "How did you do that?" She turned back with that same infuriating smile and shrugged. I just thought about it from everyone else's perspective. The maze, the predators, the programmers who designed it, once you understand what everyone wants and expects, finding the gaps becomes pretty easy. Everyone else's perspective. She had defeated the galaxy's deadliest challenge not through superior firepower or enhanced biology, but through empathy and pattern recognition. She had succeeded by understanding her opponents better than they understood themselves. Maybe Deathworlder doesn't mean what we thought it meant. Maybe humans don't survive by being the strongest or the fastest or the most naturally armed. Maybe they survive by being the smartest in ways we never considered. And not computational intelligence or enhanced cognitive processing, but the kind of intelligence that can look at an impossible situation and find the solution hidden in plain sight. Maya Sterling enrolled in our most advanced strategic thinking courses the next day. Within a week, half the student body was requesting tutorials on human-style problem-solving. Within a month, she was guest lecturing on adaptive strategy development. And that's how a small human girl taught the galaxy's apex predators what apex really means. 6 months later, I found myself observing a very different kind of class at Apex Academy. Now, the key to human strategic thinking, Maya Sterling explained to her bewildered students, is learning to think like your opponent thinks you think. Craxon raised a massive claw, confusion evident in his rock-hard features. But how do we think like something that thinks differently than we think? Exactly, Maya beamed. You're getting it. The classroom was packed with species that could level mountains, survive in vacuum, and digest pure energy. All of them taking notes while a human barely half their size explained the fundamentals of adaptive problem-solving. Professor Sterling hissed Silthan, acid pooling in frustration, "You keep saying to consider all perspectives, but my species only has predator perspective. How do I develop prey perspective?" "Well," Maya said thoughtfully, "try imagining you're something small and squishy that really doesn't want to be dissolved. What would you do?" I watched this scene through the observation window, marveling at how one human had transformed our entire institution. The Predator maze now included the Sterling Protocol, a series of intelligence-based challenges that tested strategic thinking over brute force. Our graduation requirements had been completely restructured around adaptive problem-solving rather than natural advantages. Maya had revolutionized the concept of apex education without ever leaving her classroom. Speaking of which, I realized with amusement that Maya was still standing in exactly the same spot where she'd started her first lecture 6 months ago. Her feet hadn't moved from that position during any of her classes. When a student finally asked about this peculiar habit, Maya grinned and delivered what had become her signature catchphrase. "Some things work better when you don't overthink the moving part." The galaxy's deadliest academy had been conquered by a human who understood that sometimes the most powerful move is knowing when not to move at all.